Welcome to the Wife Stories YouTube channel. New video every day, and don't forget to subscribe. Here we go.
I don't feel my body anymore. Not like I used to. There was a time when I could sense every nerve in my fingertips, the warmth in my chest when she looked at me, the rush of blood in my ears when I thought about our future. But now, it's as though I'm hovering a few inches above my own skin, watching everything from a numb vantage point. It wasn't always like this. I remember our wedding day, the early sun catching on her veil, the faint smell of lilacs near the entrance of the chapel, the anxious excitement roiling in my stomach because I thought I'd finally found the one person who would walk beside me through anything. That was the first time she took my hand as my wife, and I remember how my entire body felt alive. I remember her blue eyes brimming with tears of happiness, her voice trembling as she said, "I promise I will always be by your side." I held her hands, feeling the softness of her skin and the slight tremor of her nerves, so different from mine, yet somehow the perfect fit. I'd never believed in miracles, but that moment felt damn close. I played the role of the steady groom, the solid man. I said my vows in a low, calm voice, telling her I would always protect her. Even then, though, a tiny knot of fear tugged at my insides. I knew marriages could fail. I'd seen it happen around me, but I believed we were different. Maybe every new groom thinks that at some point, convinced his love stands apart from the sad statistics. I didn't realize how easily a single weak moment could unravel an entire tapestry. Sometimes I revisit that wedding day in my mind, trying to search for clues. Did her smile carry a hint of something else? Something that might have warned me? Did she linger a second too long during some dance with another man? I can't recall anything except her radiant glow and how she whispered, "I love you," right before we walked down the aisle, hand in hand, husband and wife. I think about that moment a lot lately, especially when the numbness expands in my chest. We'd been married 4 years before she got pregnant. We tried, but it just didn't happen at first. So when she told me about the 2 little pink lines, I was ecstatic. She laughed, the sound like tiny silver bells, and I scooped her up in my arms, as though I were some hero in an old black and white romance film. We redecorated the spare room, turned it into a bright nursery with cheerful colors. Everything about our life seemed to be gently falling into place. My job was going well, my routine was stable, and I genuinely loved sharing ordinary moments with her, making dinner, folding laundry, discussing plans for the future. All those normal, boring domestic things felt like a privilege to me. I thought that's what real love was, finding joy in each other's presence, day after day. I remember the day the baby was born, though the memory is stained now. She was in labor for hours. I stayed by the wall, at times clutching my hand so tight my knuckles turned white. My entire body was tense, both anxious and thrilled, but I was also so damn tired. There was a sterile smell all around, disinfectants, latex, sweat. The nurses kept telling me to breathe, to talk to her, to help her through the contractions. And finally, he arrived, our son. The nurse placed this tiny, squirming life on her chest. That's when the nurse gave me a small smile, a kind of encouraging look, like, "Go on, meet your boy." At that exact moment, though, she flicked open a video on her phone. I still see it in slow motion, the glow of the screen, the sudden hush in the room, and then a child's giggle in the background of that video. And right after, a man's low whisper, "Again." I remember the word, how it vibrated in the quiet. Again. A short, bold command from a male voice I didn't recognize. I tried to make sense of it. Did I just mishear? My stomach clenched so hard it felt like I'd been punched. Her eyes went wide, and her face turned pale as she fumbled, tried to shut it off. But it was too late. I looked at her. She could barely meet my gaze. She just blinked, panicked, as though she wanted to vanish under the white hospital blankets. In that instant, something in me fractured. The old me would have demanded an answer, exploded with shouts, maybe curses, but I'm not him anymore. I didn't scream, didn't accuse, didn't fling the phone across the room. Instead, I stood there, numb, silent, calm in a horrifying way. I remember how my hand trembled for just a moment, then steadied. The nurses, busy with the post-birth routines, barely noticed the tension. She whispered, It's nothing," her eyes darting away, tears forming. I didn't respond. I just closed my mouth into a thin line, lips drawn so tight they might have turned white. My heart was drumming so powerfully, I thought I might pass out. But outside, I was as cold as steel. A year ago, maybe two, if I glimpsed this scene in a movie, I would have scoffed at the absurd timing. Who checks their phone and reveals an affair right after giving birth? But here it was, my reality, raw and immediate. The nurse adjusted the baby's blankets, asked me if I wanted to hold him. I forced myself to say yes, in a flat tone, and I took the baby in my arms. He was warm, breathing softly. I looked down at his small face. He had her nose and my chin. A strange, perfect blend of our features. For a second, I forgot the phone, that Dan voice, her pale expression. There was just me and this new life. But the moment didn't last. The broken glass of betrayal was cutting through every thought, and the sweetness in my son's eyes couldn't mask the quietly pulsing agony in my chest. She must have realized how damning it all looked. The next day, lying in the hospital bed, she tried to talk, long strings of explanation that never quite formed a coherent story. It was an old video. That's just a friend. He's just joking around. You know Ryan, from my gym class. She kept stumbling over names, making half-truths and quick disclaimers. I listened, hardly said a thing beyond, or right. Her voice rose and fell, her words tangling. But I didn't give her any rope to hold on to. If I pressed her, she'd just spin more elaborate tales. So I let her babble while I stood with arms crossed, glancing at the baby in the crib, occasionally picking him up to feed or change him. My one-word replies seemed to unnerve her more than any shouting match ever could. She wanted a reaction. She wanted me to break and say something emotional, confirm that I was hurting. But I stayed cold. She fell asleep at some point, maybe from exhaustion or from the swirl of her own panicked thoughts. I walked into the corridor, that typical hospital hallway with off-white walls, a row of waiting chairs, the smell of cheap coffee wafting near the nurse's station. I found a vending machine that sold small notebooks and pens, an odd product for a hospital, but it was there. I fed in a couple of dollars, retrieved the cheap spiral-bound notebook and a ballpoint pen. I needed something to focus on, something to keep my hands busy. I sat down in the corner of that hallway, started sketching. At first, random lines, then shapes that turned into the outlines of our house. The windows, the front door, the living room. I omitted her from every stroke, erasing her presence as though she'd never existed there. No pictures on the walls, no sense of her laughter. I drew the rooms bare, the furniture minimal. There was only emptiness in those pencil lines, like I was methodically sweeping her out of my life. My phone buzzed a few times with messages from friends, coworkers sending congratulations. I forced a polite thanks. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I compiled everything I had on my phone. The suspicious text messages I'd found weeks earlier, some questionable photos, an audio file that had caught a conversation between her and a man I now recognize as Ryan. I archived it all and wrote a single line. Everything you didn't know about me and about her. Then I sent it out to my closest friends. 5 or 6 people. No hysterics, no rants, just the cold facts. Like an autopsy report, they responded with stunned silence, then with messages like, "Stay strong," and "I can't believe it." And I realized they might have suspected something but never wanted to get involved, never wanted to be the messenger of heartbreak. I stared at those messages without blinking. My chest felt hollow, but I didn't let the grief show. Instead, I typed back, "I'm fine. Don't worry." Then I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. Fine. Sure. If fine means an internal emptiness that's swallowing every emotion, maybe that was accurate. The truth was, I found out about her affair weeks before the birth. I just hadn't confronted her. Something in me was too stunned, and maybe I wanted to hold on a bit longer, perhaps for the baby's sake, or to maintain the illusion for a little more time. I'd noticed the changes in her routine, more nights out with friends, a sudden interest in late evening yoga sessions. It was too perfect a cliché. One evening, I came home early from work. The house was quiet, but I heard muffled laughter in our bedroom. There was a male voice. My heart hammered so violently I thought I'd go deaf from the pounding in my ears. I moved down the hall, step by step. The door was half open, and inside I saw her perched on the edge of the bed, wearing a robe that barely covered her thighs. In front of her was Ryan, tall, athletic, wearing only boxer briefs. Their conversation wasn't loud, but I caught the tail end of a whispered exchange. He touched her knee, slid his hand up her thigh. She didn't pull away. In that instant, I knew everything. The low, intimate tone. The glances, the closeness. It was more than friendly. It was raw and electric. I should have barged in, thrown a punch, screamed, demanded answers. But I didn't. My body was shaking, but my voice died in my throat. I retreated quietly, heart jackhammering, soul collapsing in on itself. I left the house, got in my car, and drove aimlessly for hours. I ended up at an all-night diner, sipping bitter coffee that tasted like chemicals. There, under neon lights, I devised the only plan my numb mind could handle. Gather proof, wait until after the baby's birth, then decide what to do. That's when I started saving texts, taking screenshots. I overheard phone calls, recorded them. Because part of me, maybe the naive part, thought, she's pregnant with our child. She must end it with him. Maybe this was just some fling, an impulsive mistake. Maybe she'll stop. I needed the full picture before confronting her. But she never stopped. The calls continued. The nights out didn't end. At times, she seemed genuinely remorseful, hugging me in bed, telling me how excited she was about the baby, how she wanted us to be a family. But it rang hollow to my ears. I felt the invisible barrier between us, made up of late-night texts and whispered promises to Ryan. I existed in a twisted reality where I comforted her through pregnancy pains while she carried on an affair behind my back. Even so, I never cursed her name, never spat out vile accusations in her face. I just sank deeper into that numbness, like a man quietly drowning but doing nothing to swim. Maybe that's what frightened her the most, my absolute silence. I used to call her my love, or darling, or just Sarah. But I stopped. She became the mother of my son, the woman who lives with me. No tenderness left in those words, just cold facts. It was easier than letting the anger consume me. And that anger was there, coiled inside like a ready snake. But I never let it strike. I functioned. I went to work, saved money, quietly drew up the sketches of a future where she didn't exist in my life. But oh, how I wanted revenge. Yes, that ugly desire churned in me. I wanted to watch her face when she realized I knew everything. I wanted her to feel the same hollow devastation. Yet I never let those fantasies rule me. I was more like a scientist, collecting data and carefully planning the moment to reveal it. If I confronted her too soon, she'd lie or twist the story. If I did it without proof, she'd gaslight me. So I kept all the evidence, methodical as a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. When the baby arrived, and that again from Ryan's voice spilled into the quiet hospital room, I recognized that the time for illusions was over. She knew I knew. There was no going back. That's why I started the cold, methodical steps of cutting her out of my emotional space. First, I shared the truth with our friends. Next, I carefully set aside finances. I called a lawyer, explained that I needed advice about custody and divorce. He gave me a series of instructions, told me not to do anything rash, recommended a paternity test if I doubted the child's father. But the second I held my son, I felt an unshakable certainty that he was mine. I can't explain it rationally, but I know. I don't need a test. The baby's eyes and the shape of his chin mirror mine. I trust that instinct, though it doesn't lessen the sting of what she did. When we got home from the hospital, she tried to resume normal life, carrying the baby around, cooing at him, saying how she was so happy to be back. I responded with short nods. I changed the baby's diaper, prepared formula, and rocked him to sleep. She started with those long apologies again, weaving stories about how she felt lonely, how Ryan was some misguided friend who misunderstood her signals, or how she was emotionally overwhelmed and turned to him for comfort. The narratives changed every time she opened her mouth. I just stared, silent. She cried often, her tears streaming down her cheeks, while she tried to hand me the baby or fix dinner. But I remained as still as a marble statue, my expressions carefully controlled. I refused to give her the relief of seeing me break down. She deserved none of that from me. Days turned into weeks. She was sore from childbirth, physically drained, but her emotional exhaustion was worse. She kept trying to regain control, to patch up a marriage that was irreparably torn. Ryan tried to call her phone, but I had set up an automatic forward. I sought every message. He asked to see her again. "We need to talk," he wrote. "I miss you," or "I'm losing my mind without you." She never replied in front of me, but I watched her sneak off to the bathroom with the phone in hand, presumably to read or respond. She was sloppy about covering her tracks, or maybe she'd just given up. Either way, the final confrontation was inevitable. One Saturday, about 3 weeks after we brought the baby home, she was in the nursery trying to rock him to sleep. I stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching her. She looked exhausted, wearing loose sweatpants, her hair in a messy bun. She caught me observing her, and for a moment we locked eyes. Her lips quivered. "Please," she whispered, "can we talk?" I nodded once. We went to the living room, leaving the baby in the crib. She started rummaging for words, stammering through a new version of an apology. She tried to paint her affair as a moment of weakness, insisting it was over, that she regretted it. I sat on the sofa, my arms resting on my knees, looking at the floor. When she paused, I calmly took out my phone, tapped through a folder labeled Proof, and let her see the messages, the screenshots, the photos. She was speechless. Her face went white. Her hands trembled, covering her mouth as she scrolled. She had no idea I'd collected so much. Then, without raising my voice, I said, "I've spoken to a lawyer. We need to figure out custody." She immediately started hyperventilating, tears flooding her face. She reached for my hand, trying to hold it. But I pulled away. "Please, no," she begged. "I'll do anything." I was stupid, lonely. Words tumbled out in frantic waves. I could see the panic in her eyes. She was realizing that I was serious, that there was no easy fix. I stared at her, expressionless, waiting. Finally, she asked, "Do you even love me anymore?" My answer was a single syllable. No. It wasn't the entire truth. Part of me still felt the old love burning somewhere deep inside, but it was buried under layers of betrayal and pain. I refused to let that flicker of affection control me. I refused to show her any vulnerability. She sobbed uncontrollably, trying to wrap her arms around me, but I stood and stepped away. "Don't," I muttered. Then I turned my back, grabbed my jacket, and walked outside. The cold air slapped my face, an almost welcome sensation. That's how my revenge started, not with fury, but with the slow, methodical removal of her from my life, from my emotional orbit. I filed for divorce the next day, citing infidelity as the reason. I didn't scream or throw accusations in a court. I just provided the evidence to my lawyer, letting him handle the formalities. Within a week, she realized how determined I was. She tried to meet with Ryan again, apparently to figure out if she had any fallback plan. But from the messages, I gleaned that he was more interested in hooking up than offering her a stable future. Their messages became increasingly strained, culminating in him ignoring her calls. So, ironically, she found herself alone, with a newborn, about to lose her marriage. My friends, who had initially responded with stunned texts, started calling to ask if there was anything they could do. I told them, I'm good. They came over sometimes, bringing groceries, or just to see how I was holding up. I never let them see me crumble. I remained the same quiet, cold version of myself, answering in monotone. It's under control, I'd say. The lawyer's handling it. Meanwhile, Sarah was in tears almost every day, apologizing, begging, sometimes yelling at me to talk, to vent my anger. She kept saying she'd rather I screamed at her than treated her like a ghost. But my silence was absolute. I served her with the divorce papers while she was in the kitchen, trying to feed the baby. Her hands shook so badly, she almost dropped the spoon. I said, sign them. We'll work out a schedule for our son. And then I turned to leave the room. Those days tested every bit of my emotional restraint. If I let myself go, I'd either break down crying or lash out in violent rage. But I kept that rage locked away. Instead, I poured my focus into the baby. Late nights found me in the nursery, cradling my son against my chest as he slept. His tiny breathing was the one thing that felt real, that reminded me I still had a heart. Sometimes I whispered, "You're mine. I'll protect you," in the darkness, and in those moments, I allowed myself a small surge of love. But whenever Sarah tried to approach, I closed up like a vault. She'd watch from the doorway, tears glistening, powerless. One evening, Ryan himself had the nerve to show up at our house. I opened the door to find him standing there, wearing a designer jacket, a smirk flickering on his face like he was trying to play it cool. I took a moment to look at him. Tall, fit, hair carefully styled. Maybe once I'd have been intimidated. That night, I felt nothing. "Is Sarah here?" he asked. "We need to talk." He tried to sound decisive, but his eyes darted around, searching for her. I stepped onto the porch, closed the door behind me so he couldn't see inside. My voice was steady, low. "You need to leave." He drew in a breath to protest, something about how it was important, but I didn't let him finish. "Listen," I said, staring right into his eyes. "I've already filed for divorce. She's free for you, if that's what you both want. But you have no reason to be at my house. My son is asleep inside, and I won't have him disturbed. Do you understand me?" Every syllable was calm, clinical, as though I was explaining a policy to a clueless coworker. Ryan seemed unsure, possibly expecting a physical confrontation. He glanced at my hands, but I kept them at my sides, relaxed. He hesitated, maybe wanted to push his luck. Then he caught my expression, ice cold, unwavering, and he took a step back. "All right, man," he muttered. "Just tell her I want to talk." I gave a short nod, a motion that said I'd heard him but didn't necessarily agree to relay the message. Then I locked eyes with him for another few seconds, letting him see the emptiness in my stare. Finally, he turned and left. I watched his silhouette fade into the dark, feeling neither triumph nor fear, just a hollow confirmation that I was prepared to face anything. My hands trembled once I was alone, but I clenched them, inhaled slowly, and went back inside. Sarah must have heard muffled voices, because she stood in the hallway, looking terrified. "I told him to go," I said. That was all. The days that followed were a whirlwind of paperwork, endless forms, and quiet negotiations about custody. Sarah wanted to try couples therapy, to salvage something for the baby's sake, but I refused. I wasn't interested in therapy or mediation. My mind was made up. She'd had her chance to come clean before the baby was born, before the hospital fiasco. Now there was nothing left to salvage. Sometimes I saw her in tears, clutching our son against her chest, whispering, "I'm so sorry," over and over, but I never responded. I guess my real revenge was in the sheer, emotionless finality of my actions. I didn't hurl insults or threaten to take our son away permanently. I just calmly explained that I'd fight for primary custody, that she could see him on weekends once she was settled. My lawyer was proficient, thorough. Within a few weeks, we had a temporary arrangement. She eventually moved into a cramped apartment across town, packing her clothes and toiletries, while the baby stayed with me most of the time. I never raised my voice, never told her to get out, but she felt the unstoppable current pushing her away. She had lost my trust, my respect, and my willingness to share a home. One afternoon, while she was packing, I found her in the nursery. She was standing over the crib, tears silently streaming as she watched the baby sleep. She turned when she heard me step inside. She tried to speak, but no words came out. I stood there, arms crossed, watching her. She finally managed to say, "I know you hate me." I kept silent. She let out a shaky breath. "I'll sign whatever. I deserve this, I guess. I want you to know I do love him. And I did love you. I still do." My voice was barely above a whisper. "You betrayed both of us." She swallowed hard. "I know." Without another word, I walked out. If I stayed, I might have let my tears show. I might have cracked. But that was the one thing I refused to do in front of her. As the divorce neared finalization, my anger began to morph into something else. I'm not sure if it was relief or an even deeper sadness, but at least the suffocating rage lifted a bit. I still felt numb, but the numbness was gradually becoming familiar, like wearing clothes that don't quite fit but you learn to move in them. I returned to work. People asked polite questions, and I answered with, "It's all good," or "We're working it out." The only place I showed any real sign of life was at home with my son. My routine became about feeding him, changing him, rocking him to sleep, and occasionally letting him grip my finger in his tiny fist. That unconditional trust in his eyes reminded me that I wasn't completely hollow. Friends sometimes pried, wanting more details, wanting me to vent. I never did. I told them the short version. "She cheated. It's over. I have evidence." Then I'd shrug, change the subject. They didn't push too hard. Maybe they sensed the steel barrier I'd built. A few of them, especially those who'd been married longer, gave me sympathetic looks or gentle advice. "Maybe you'll feel better if you talk to someone," they'd say. I'd just respond, "I'm good," in that same lifeless tone. A part of me recognized that I was transforming into a closed-off shell of a man, but I couldn't muster the energy to care. Sarah's attempts to reconcile became more desperate after she moved out. She'd show up randomly, pressing the buzzer at the gate, begging to come in. Sometimes she was in tears, sometimes trying to appear strong, but always with that pleading expression. She'd say she wanted to see her son. I'd let her in for the baby's sake, though I offered her no hospitality. I didn't want to pretend we were a family. I'd hand her the baby, step back, and watch them from a distance. She'd coo at him, hold him, sometimes cry into his tiny blanket. Then she'd try to talk to me about us, about the years we'd spent together. "Remember the wedding day?" She'd say, "You were so happy." I'd stare at her with vacant eyes, reminding her with my silence that it was all gone. She sought forgiveness, hoping for a miracle. But there are some lines that, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. She must have realized that eventually, because her visits grew more sporadic, and her pleas softened to a kind of resigned sadness. I think she started to accept that I wasn't going to come undone and rush into her arms. The final blow came the day we were scheduled to sign the official divorce papers. The courthouse was a simple building with dull institutional lighting. She stood on one side, I stood on the other, lawyers between us. We didn't say much, just waited to be called. The actual signing was quick. I methodically signed each page, flipping through them with calm detachment. She signed, tears glistening in her eyes. After the clerk stamped the documents, it was done. Our marriage was officially dissolved. Outside, she followed me to my car, trying one last time to reach me. "David, please," she whispered, her voice choking. "I know I ruined everything. But if there's a chance, She trailed off, her eyes searching mine. I opened my car door, paused for a heartbeat. Goodbye, Sarah. That was it. I got in and drove away, not even glancing at the rearview mirror. She was gone from my life as my wife. From that moment on, she'd only be the mother of my son. The sense of finality settled over me like a deep chill. You might think that once I got my revenge, this cold, methodical severing of ties, I'd feel triumphant, or at least vindicated. But I mostly felt emptiness and a faint echo of sorrow. I'd spent months carefully navigating this heartbreak, planning how to end it, and now it was over. The quiet was almost worse than the tension. The best word might be hollow, because no matter how justified I felt, the life I once envisioned was dead. My rage had nowhere to go but inward, like a dying flame. I wouldn't allow myself to break, though. I had a son to raise. Over the following weeks, I learned to focus on the present. My baby needed me, and I found a strange, calm fulfillment in being his primary parent. There were sleepless nights, feedings at odd hours, changing diapers at 3 a.m., but in that routine, I found a small measure of peace. I began to feel my body again, slowly, in subtle ways, like how my shoulder muscles ached after holding him for an hour, or how my chest felt a light warmth when he smiled in his sleep. It wasn't the thunderous passion I'd once felt, but it was real, grounded, and mine. Sarah, for her part, abided by the custody arrangement. She'd pick him up every other weekend, spend time with him in her tiny apartment. I'd get him back Sunday evening. At first, my heart pounded every time I let him go, a visceral fear that he might prefer her, that I'd lose the only precious thing left to me. But he always came back content, sometimes a little fussy, but happy enough. She seemed to treat him well. That was a relief, at least. We communicated sparingly, texts about the baby's schedule or his needs. I never asked about Ryan, and she never brought him up. Maybe they tried to make it work, or maybe she realized he wasn't the type for a stable relationship. I didn't care. I was free of them both. Months passed. I eventually sold the house. It was too big, too full of echoes. I moved to a simpler place, a 2-bedroom condo, where I could focus on raising my son without all those ghosts lingering in the corners. I kept working at my job, the same steady position. My colleagues noticed I'd grown quieter, more deliberate. Some asked if I was dating again. I merely shook my head. Not interested, I said. Maybe I'll be ready someday, but not now. It's hard to imagine opening my heart again. The trust I once had is locked away, maybe gone for good. People say time heals everything. I'm not sure if that's true. It definitely dulls the edges, though. In the quiet evenings after I tuck my son into bed, I sometimes pull out that old notebook from the hospital corridor. The sketches I drew that day show empty rooms, barren walls. It's haunting, but also a reminder of what I survived. I flip through the pages, see the faint lines of her silhouette erased so thoroughly that only smudges remain. Then I close it, set it aside, and watch my son sleep, listening to the gentle hiss of the baby monitor. A wave of emotion always sweeps through me, but I let it pass. I've learned how to endure. Not long ago, I found a photograph of our wedding in a box I was packing away. She looked beautiful that day, glowing in her white dress, and I looked different, younger. I studied my own face, searching for that man who believed wholeheartedly in forever. I didn't recognize him. He seemed almost naive in his confidence, the kind of man who never imagined betrayal could happen in his home. I set the photo aside without tearing it, but I also didn't keep it on display. Some memories aren't meant to be displayed like trophies. I've learned something about men and tears. Everyone says men don't cry, that we're supposed to hold it in. I did hold it in, like a fortress, and that quiet, suppressed pain is what fueled the cold vengeance that followed. Would it have been healthier to shout? Possibly, but it wouldn't have changed a damn thing. My path was decided the moment I saw her with him, the moment I heard that whisper in the hospital. Again. Now, as I stand here in this new chapter of my life, I don't regret how I handled it. I needed to slice her out of my life, like a surgeon cutting away dead tissue. No fanfare, no screaming. A clean, methodical incision. The wound still hurts sometimes, but at least the poison isn't spreading. My boy is starting to walk now, wobbly steps across the living room floor, hands outstretched for balance. The first time he did it, he looked up at me with shining eyes, expecting praise. I knelt, arms open, and scooped him into a hug. In that moment, I felt a surging warmth in my chest, a spark of life. He's my anchor, the reason I can keep going without drowning in bitterness. He's the one piece of beauty left from that ruined marriage. I'll protect him with everything I have. Sometimes, late at night, I can't sleep. I think about how my life would have been if she'd never met Ryan, if she hadn't betrayed our vows. But that path is gone. I can't live in the if only. So I focus on what's real now. The quiet. My son's soft breathing in the next room. The knowledge that I can endure anything. I'm still numb in some ways, but little by little, I'm reclaiming my body, my sense of self. If I ever love again, it'll be with guarded caution. Trust was once a sturdy bridge, and she lit it on fire. I had to rebuild myself on the ashes. This is the aftermath of betrayal. A man stands alone, battered but intact, forging a new future from wreckage. There's a kind of power in that, a quiet strength. And maybe, just maybe, that's what I needed to learn all along. So no, I don't feel my body the same way I did on my wedding day, filled with naive joy. But that's all right. I'm still alive, still standing, and that means I can keep going. One step at a time, just like my son learning to walk. The difference is I no longer expect life to be kind or fair. I only know that I have to protect what matters to me, and to let go of anything that poisons my world. If that makes me a colder man, so be it. A part of me died when I saw her with him, but another part survived. That survivor is the man I've become. Stronger, colder, more cautious. And he's the one telling the story.